The air in my apartment always smelled of Moebius 9010 oil, stale tea, and the dry, papery scent of patience. It was a smell that most people found cloying, a scent of stagnation. To me, it was the perfume of the universe holding its breath. I sat on my stool, a spine-curved posture I had maintained for 40 years, my eye pressed against the brass rim of a loupe. The world outside my window, the honking taxis of Chicago, the screaming sirens, the relentless, graceless rush of the 21st century, did not exist. In my world, the entire cosmos was 5 millimeters wide. I was adjusting the hairspring of a movement that didn't officially exist yet. It was a prototype, a constant force mechanism commissioned by a consortium in Geneva that the public would only hear about in 3 years, and only if they had a net worth exceeding 9 figures. To the naked eye, the room was a disaster. Shelves lined the walls, sagging under the weight of cardboard boxes marked with Sharpie scrawls, mainsprings, brass offcuts, failed rotors. Piles of what looked like scrap metal cluttered the floor. To the uninitiated, it was the hoard of a senile old man who couldn't let go of the industrial age. To the initiated, of whom there were perhaps 5 alive on this continent, it was a library of kinetic history. Jesus, Bill, how do you live like this? The voice shattered my concentration. My hand, usually as steady as a granite plinth, jerked. The tweezers scratched the bridge, a microscopic scratch, invisible to Grant, but to me, it was a canyon carved into the surface of perfection. I exhaled slowly, lowering the loop. I turned on my stool. Grant was standing in the doorway of my workshop, filling the frame. He was a large man, not in muscle, but in presence. He occupied space aggressively. He was wearing a vest made of some shiny synthetic material, a T-shirt that cost $200, and on his wrist sat a black square of glass and plastic, a smartwatch. A device that didn't tell time, it just told you how much time you were wasting. Behind him stood Jessica, my daughter. She looked tired. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on the piles of brass, the dust motes dancing in the shaft of afternoon light. She pulled her cardigan tighter around herself as if the poverty of the room was contagious. "We talked about this, Dad," Jessica said, her voice tight. "Grant offered to help you clean up. You can't keep living in a fire hazard. It's embarrassing." "It's not a fire hazard, Jess," I said softly. My voice sounded rusty. I hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days. "It's an archive," Grant laughed. It was a loud barking sound that had no rhythm. "Archive? Bill, buddy, this is a scrapyard. Look at this." He walked into the room. He didn't ask. He just walked in, his expensive sneakers squeaking on the hardwood. He reached out and picked up a heavy brass cylinder from my workbench. My stomach dropped. "Grant, please," I said, standing up. "Don't touch that." "Relax, old-timer," Grant said, tossing the cylinder from one hand to the other like a baseball. "I'm just assessing the inventory. You know, disruption isn't just about software. It's about optimizing physical space. You have valuable square footage here occupied by literal junk." He held the cylinder up to the light. It was dull, heavy, and covered in a thin layer of protective grease. To Grant, it looked like a part from a 1950s tractor. It was not a tractor part. It was the Model 4 gravity escapement. I had spent 8 months calculating the torque transfer. It was designed to isolate the balance wheel from the variations in drivetrain torque. It was a piece of engineering that solved a problem Breguet had struggled with in 1795. The brass was merely the housing. Inside was a cage of titanium and a pallet fork tipped with synthetic ruby, grown in a lab in Zurich specifically for this device. The invoice for that single cylinder was $400,000, It was due to be shipped to Vacheron-Constantin on Tuesday. It's heavy, Grant mused, sneering at it. Solid brass? We could scrap this. I know a guy in Jersey who buys scrap metal by the pound, gets you a few $100, buy you some new shirts, maybe an air purifier. Put it down, Grant, I said. I didn't shout. I never shouted. Shouting distorts the air pressure. It is not scrap. It is a prototype. A prototype for what? Grant smirked. A steam engine? Bill, look at my wrist. He held up his smartwatch. The screen lit up with a notification. This connects to satellites. It measures my blood oxygen. It tracks my sleep. That is technology. This, he gestured with the cylinder, this is nostalgia, and nostalgia is a liability. Grant, put it down, Jessica said, but she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the floor, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. She was ashamed. She wanted him to be right so they could leave. I'm just saying, Grant said, turning back to me, you're holding on to the past. You need to pivot. Let me help you clear this out. We can call a junk hauler today. He spun the cylinder on his finger. It was a casual, thoughtless motion, the kind of motion a child makes with a toy. The grease on the brass was slippery. I saw it happen in slow motion. Time, my old friend and adversary, dilated. I saw the cylinder slide from his fingertip. I saw Grant's eyes widen, not in horror, but in mild surprise. I saw the brass object falling through the air, rotating once, twice. I lunged, but I was 71 years old. My mind was fast, but my knees were carbon and calcium. The cylinder hit the edge of the steel workbench. Crack. It wasn't a metallic clang. It was a dry, sharp snap, a sickening sound, like a finger breaking. The cylinder bounced and rolled across the floor, coming to a rest at Jessica's feet. Silence rushed into the room. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to stop. The dust motes froze. I stood there, my hand outstretched, trembling. I knew that sound. I knew exactly what had happened. The shock of the impact had driven the titanium cage into the pallet fork. The synthetic ruby impulse pin, a component cut to a tolerance of 2 microns, had shattered. The heart of the machine was dead. 8 months. $400,000. The reputation of the Ghost Master. Gone. I closed my eyes. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a hollow ache where the rhythm used to be. Oops, Grant said. He didn't sound horrified. He sounded like someone who had dropped a spoon. Oops, I whispered. I opened my eyes. I looked at him. Slippery little sucker, Grant said, wiping his hand on his pants. You should really degrease your junk, Bill. That's a safety hazard. I looked at the cylinder on the floor. I couldn't move. Dad, don't make that face, Jessica said, stepping back from the object as if it were a dead rat. It was an accident. Grant didn't mean to. It's broken, I said. My voice was flat. It's just a cog, Dad, Jessica snapped. The stress in her voice spiked. She was terrified I was going to make a scene, that I was going to embarrass her in front of her millionaire fiancé. It's just an old piece of metal. You have boxes of them. Look around. You have thousands of them. It was a commission, I said. How much could it possibly be worth? Grant laughed, reaching for his wallet. Here, I'll Venmo you $50. That should cover the scrap value and the emotional damage. Go buy yourself a nice dinner or some WD-40. He pulled out his phone. He was actually going to do it. $50, I repeated. Okay, 100, Grant said, rolling his eyes. Call it an inconvenience fee. Jess, seriously, your dad is dramatic. It fell 2 feet. I looked at Jessica. I searched her face for a glimmer of the little girl who used to sit on my lap and watch me assemble a chronograph. I looked for the girl who used to ask, Daddy, how does the watch know when a second is over? And who would listen with wide eyes when I explained the oscillation of the balance wheel? I didn't see her. I saw a woman in her 30s wearing shoes that pinched her feet, standing next to a man who thought he could buy the sun with an app. She looked at me with pity and impatience. "Take the money, Dad," she whispered. "Please, don't be weird." Something inside me clicked, a final detent falling into place. I didn't yell. I didn't explain that the ruby bearing cost more than Grant's car. I didn't tell them that the client in Geneva would not accept a delay. I just nodded. "You're right," I said. "It's just metal." Grant beamed. He clapped his hands together. "See? That's the spirit. Pivot, adapt, move on. That's the mindset of a winner." He put his phone away. He didn't send the money. He forgot instantly. "Listen, Bill," Grant said, checking his watch again. "We gotta run. I have a call with Tokyo in 10 minutes. But look, I feel bad about the cog thing, and Jess says you never get out." He exchanged a look with Jessica, a look of conspiracy. "There's a charity gala tonight," Grant said. "The Time for Hope auction. High-end stuff. Very exclusive. I bought a table. Why don't you come? Get out of this dungeon. Put on a suit. Rub shoulders with the elite. Maybe you'll learn something about what real luxury looks like today. You know, seeing what people actually pay for." Jessica looked anxious. Grant: "I don't think Dad has a suit that fits, and it's black tie." "Nonsense," Grant waved her off. "He's got that old tuxedo from the wedding photos. Dust it off, Bill. Come have some free champagne, see how the other half lives. It might inspire you to, elevate your game." "Elevate my game?" I echoed. "Exactly," Grant winked. "We'll send a car for you at 7. Don't be late, and don't bring any greasy gears in your pockets, all right?" He laughed at his own joke. He put his arm around Jessica and guided her out of the room. "Bye, Dad," Jessica murmured, not meeting my eyes. "Please, just try to be normal tonight." They left. I heard the front door of the apartment close. I heard their footsteps fading down the hallway. I heard Grant's voice booming, complaining about the smell of the building. And then silence returned. But it was a broken silence. The rhythm of the room was off. I walked slowly to the spot where the cylinder lay. I knelt down. My knees cracked, a sound of dry friction. I picked it up. It was heavy, cold. I carried it to the workbench. I cleared a space, pushing aside the invoices and the sketches. I sat down on my stool. I put the loupe to my eye. I looked into the heart of the mechanism. It was a massacre. The impulse pin was shattered into 3 jagged shards of synthetic corundum. The titanium cage was bent by a fraction of a millimeter, perhaps 0.05 millimeters. To Grant, it was invisible. To the escapement, it was a catastrophe. The geometry was ruined. The isochronism was destroyed. I stared at the broken ruby. It glittered under the halogen light, a beautiful, tragic ruin. $50, Home Depot, scrap metal. I felt a tear form in my eye, not from sadness, from frustration. The sheer, overwhelming frustration of being invisible. For 40 years, I had been the ghost. When Patek Philippe needed a minute repeater that chimed in a specific key for the Sultan of Brunei, they didn't call their own master watchmakers. They called me. When the curator of the Louvre dropped the Marie Antoinette pocket watch during a cleaning in 1998, they didn't call the police. They flew me to Paris on a private jet. I fixed it in a secure basement room in 3 nights. My name was on patents held by Rolex, by Jaeger-LeCoultre, by Audemars Piguet. But my name was never on the dial. I was the secret, the man who solved the impossible problems, and I was paid in silence and wire transfers to a blind trust that Jessica knew nothing about. She thought I was a retired repairman who fixed cuckoo clocks for neighbors. She thought my poverty was real because I chose to live here, in the same apartment where I had raised her, where her mother had died. She didn't understand that I didn't care about penthouses. I cared about the work. But today the work had been disrespected, not just the object, the philosophy. Grant thought he was a disruptor. He thought he was the future, but he was just noise. He was amplitude without frequency. He was a mainspring unwinding all at once, destructive, chaotic, and ultimately short-lived. I took the loupe off my eye. I looked at the clock on the wall. 5:30 p.m. "Elevate my game," I whispered to the empty room. I stood up. I walked to the back of the apartment, to the narrow closet in my bedroom. I pushed aside the flannel shirts and the worn corduroys. At the back, inside a garment bag that smelled of cedar and lavender, hung my tuxedo. It was not a rental. It was a bespoke Anderson and Shepard, cut for me on Savile Row in 1984. It was midnight blue, so dark it looked black. The lapels were silk grosgrain. I took it out. I laid it on the bed. I went to the bathroom and showered, scrubbing the oil and the grease from my hands with a pumice stone until my skin was raw and pink. I shaved with a straight razor, watching my face in the mirror. The wrinkles were deep, maps of a life spent squinting at microscopic worlds, but the eyes were clear. I dressed slowly. The ritual was calming. The crisp pop of the starch on the dress shirt, the slide of the silk braces, the weight of the onyx studs. I tied the bow tie, not a clip-on, never a clip-on, a real knot, slightly imperfect, which was the mark of a gentleman. I put on the jacket. It still fit. A little loose in the shoulders, perhaps. I had shrunk with age, but the cut was masterful. It hid the frailty. It built a silhouette of authority. I looked in the mirror. Bill the Tinkerer was gone. In his place stood William, the ghost master, the man who held time in his hands. I walked back to the workshop. The broken cylinder sat on the bench, the evidence of their ignorance, the corpse of my work. I reached out and picked it up. It was heavy in my pocket, pulling the fabric of the tuxedo jacket down slightly, a reminder, a weight. Grant wanted me to learn about luxury. He wanted to show me what people actually pay for. I checked my own watch, a vintage piece, no branding on the dial. Just a tourbillon spinning at 6 o'clock, beating at 18,000 vibrations per hour. A watch I had made myself, from scratch. A watch that collectors would kill to own if they knew it existed. 7 p.m. The car would be downstairs. I turned off the lights in the workshop. The darkness swallowed the clutter, the boxes, the dust. In the dark, you couldn't see the poverty. You could only hear the ticking. 1,000 clocks beating out the seconds. Tick, tock, tick, tock. They were counting down. I walked to the door, my patent leather shoes clicking on the floorboards. "Okay, Grant," I said softly, opening the door. "Let's go to school." I stepped out into the hallway, locking the door behind me. I patted the pocket where the broken heart of the machine lay. I was ready to receive my receipt. The venue for the Time for Hope Gala was the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel. It was a cavern of crystal chandeliers, velvet drapes, and the suffocating smell of lilies and expensive perfume. I stood at the entrance, handing my coat to a Czech girl who looked at me with bored indifference. She didn't see me. I was just another old man in a tuxedo, invisible. I walked into the main hall. It was crowded. Men in tuxedos that cost $5,000 but fit poorly. Women in gowns that sparkled like diamonds. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne, weaving like escapement wheels. I scanned the room. I saw Grant immediately. He was hard to miss. He was standing near the center of the room, holding court. He was louder than everyone else. He was gesturing with a champagne flute, spilling a little with every movement. Jessica stood next to him. She looked beautiful in a green dress, but her posture was rigid. She was scanning the door, looking for me, dreading my arrival. I began to make my way through the crowd. I moved differently now. In the workshop, I was careful, slow. Here, I was fluid. I knew how to move in these rooms. I had been attending galas like this in Geneva and London for decades, usually slipping out the back door before the speeches began. I approached them from behind. "So I told him," Grant was saying, his voice booming. "You can't just iterate. You have to disrupt. It's like this watch auction tonight. Old tech, dead tech, but people pay for the story, right? It's all just marketing." "Grant," I said. He spun around. Jessica turned with him. They both stopped. Grant's mouth opened slightly. He looked me up and down. He expected the cardigan. He expected the stains. He expected the shuffled posture of the defeated father. He didn't expect the Anderson and Shepherd tuxedo. He didn't expect the mirror shine on the shoes. He didn't expect the way I stood, straight, hands clasped behind my back, head tilted slightly. "Bill?" Grant asked, blinking. "Wow, you clean up nice old-timer. Did you rent that?" "No," I said. "I found it in the archive." Jessica stared at me. Her eyes widened. She recognized the suit. She remembered it from photos of her mother. A flash of emotion crossed her face, nostalgia, confusion, and then, quickly, a return to anxiety. "You look great, Dad," she said, nervously touching his arm. "Really, but—" "Try to keep it low-key, okay? Grant is trying to network with some investors." "I will be a shadow," I said. "Good," Grant said, recovering his swagger. "Come on, let me show you what we're bidding on. They have some displays set up. Prepare to be shocked by the prices. It's insane what people pay for gears and springs." He led us toward a row of glass display cases along the far wall. A crowd was gathered there, murmuring in hushed tones. "Look at this," Grant said, pointing to the first case. "A Patek Philippe perpetual calendar. Estimate $80,000. Can you believe that? For a watch that is less accurate than my phone." I looked at the watch. It was a reference. 3,940. A classic. "It is not about accuracy, Grant," I said quietly. "It is about permanence." "It's about branding," Grant corrected me, laughing. "It's a status flex. That's all." We moved down the line, a Jaeger LeCoultre, a vintage Omega. And then we reached the final case, the center of attention. A spotlight shone down on a single watch resting on a velvet pillow. 2 security guards stood on either side of the case. The placard read, "The Star of the Night, Mystery Prototype, Unique Piece." Asterisk Grant whistled. "Check this out. This is the big ticket item. They say it's a prototype from a ghost master, anonymous maker. The estimate is $500,000. I looked at the watch. My heart beat a slow, steady rhythm. Tick-tock. It was the Cerberus, a triple-axis tourbillon I had built 5 years ago for a collector who had died before taking delivery. His estate had donated it. I knew every screw in that watch. I knew that the third wheel was made of a specific alloy of gold and copper I had smelted myself in my kitchen. I knew that if you held it at a 45-degree angle, you could see my signature engraved on the undersides of the balance bridge, a signature visible only with a powerful loop. "WH, $500,000, Grant scoffed. "For a watch with no brand name? Who is this ghost master anyway? Probably some marketing gimmick invented by the auction house to drive up the price." A man standing next to us turned. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing a tuxedo that fit as well as mine. He had a French Legion of Honor pin on his lapel. It was Henri Sinclair, the CEO of the auction house, and one of the few men who knew my face. Henri looked at Grant with mild distaste. Then his eyes slid to me. He froze. His eyes widened. He looked at the watch in the case, then back at me. A smile of pure, unadulterated shock and reverence spread across his face. He took a step toward us. "Dad," Jessica whispered, tugging my sleeve. "Let's go get a drink. We're in the way." "Wait," I said. Henri Sinclair was approaching. He ignored Grant. He ignored the other millionaires. He walked straight to me. "Monsieur Hensley," Henri said, his voice trembling with excitement. "Is it really you?" Grant frowned. "Who?" "His name is Bill." Henri ignored him. He extended his hand to me, bowing slightly, a gesture of profound respect. "We did not know you were coming," Henri said. "This is an honor, a supreme honor. We have the Cerberus on display. Everyone is asking about the maker." I took Henri's hand. "Hello, Henri?" Grant looked at me. He looked at Henri. He looked at Jessica. "Wait, you know this guy?" Grant asked, a nervous laugh bubbling up. "Bill, how do you know the auctioneer?" Henri turned to Grant. His expression was icy. "This guy," Henri repeated, his French accent sharpening. "Sir, you are speaking to William Hensley, the greatest living horologist in the Western Hemisphere, the ghost master himself." The silence that fell over our little circle was heavier than the silence in my workshop. Grant's mouth fell open. He looked at the watch in the case, valued at $500,000. He looked at me. "What?" Jessica whispered. "Dad? What's he talking about?" I reached into my pocket. My hand closed around the cold, heavy brass of the broken prototype, the receipt. I pulled it out. "Grant," I said, my voice calm, precise, cutting through the noise of the party. "I believe you owe me a little more than $50. I placed the broken gravity escapement on top of the glass display case. It sat there, a ruined masterpiece, gleaming under the spotlight next to the Cerberus. "This," I said, pointing to the broken metal, "was the sister mechanism to the one inside that watch. It was worth $400,000. I looked Grant in the eye. "And you broke it." The crowd around us turned. The whisper started. "The Ghostmaster? He's here? What happened?" Grant's face turned the color of ash. He looked at the broken piece. He looked at the price tag on the watch in the case. The math hit him like a physical blow. Grant stammered. It was just junk. You said it was junk." "I said it was a prototype," I corrected him. I turned to Henri. "Henri, would you mind appraising this damage for the gentleman? He seems to think Home Depot carries synthetic ruby impulse pins for a Model 4 gravity escapement." Henri looked at the broken mechanism. He gasped. He pulled a loop from his pocket, because men like Henri always carried a loop, and leaned down. "Mon Dieu," Henri whispered. This is a tragedy. This is the Vacheron Commission, the lost caliber." He looked up at Grant with pure disgust. "Sir, you have destroyed a piece of history." Jessica put her hand over her mouth. She looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time in 20 years, she saw the suit. She saw the respect in Henri's eyes. She saw the junk for what it was. "Dad," she choked out, You made that?" I brushed a piece of lint from my lapel. "Yes," I said, "I make things. I don't just disrupt them." I looked at Grant. He was sweating. He was looking for an exit. But the crowd had boxed us in. He was trapped in the gravity of the moment. "I think," I said, "we need to talk about my consultation fee." The Pierre Hotel ballroom was a centrifuge of vanity. It spun with the kinetic energy of new money, old debts, and the desperate glittering need to be seen. I stood on the periphery of the circle Grant had formed, my hands clasped behind my back in the parade rest of a man who has spent a lifetime waiting for the perfect alignment of gears. The air conditioning was working too hard, fighting the heat generated by 500 bodies and 1,000 halogen lights. But I felt cold. It was the cold of clarity. Grant was in his element. He was holding court with a group of venture capitalists and minor celebrities, his voice booming over the string quartet playing softly in the corner. He had forgotten, or perhaps suppressed, the moment by the display case. Denial is a powerful mechanism. It allows the incompetent to function without the friction of self-awareness. It's all about the wrist presence, Grant was saying, rolling up the sleeve of his tuxedo jacket to reveal his watch. It was a monstrosity, a Hublot Big Bang customized with aftermarket diamonds that had no business being on a bezel. It was a watch that shouted, screamed, and begged for attention, yet possessed the horological soul of a calculator. Carbon fiber case, ceramic bezel, Grant bragged, tapping the crystal. Dropped 40 grand on this bad boy. It's indestructible. That's what I love about modern tech. Unlike, he gestured vaguely in my direction with his champagne flute, unlike the stuff Jessica's dad tinkers with. Right, Bill? The group turned to look at me. I was the curiosity. The old man in the vintage suit who didn't quite fit the demographic of tech disruptor or hedge fund manager. Grant tells us you're into watches, Bill, one of the men said. He was wearing a Patek Philippe Nautilus, reference 5711, a hype watch. He wore it not because he loved it, but because Instagram told him it was an asset class. I dabble, I said softly. He fixes toasters, mostly, Grant laughed, clapping me on the shoulder. The weight of his hand was patronizing, heavy. And old cuckoo clocks, hobby stuff. Keeps him busy in retirement. The workshop is, well, you saw it, Jess. It's a bit of a hoarder situation. Smells like oil and old socks. Jessica forced a smile, sipping her drink quickly. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was complicit in this humiliation, her silence the grease that allowed Grant's gears to turn. Well, everyone needs a hobby, the man with the Nautilus said dismissively, turning back to Grant. So, about this Series A round. I stood there listening to the ticking of the room. I looked at the Nautilus on the man's wrist. From 3 feet away, I could see the lubricant on the date wheel was drying out. The changeover would be sluggish. I looked at the lady next to him, wearing a Cartier tank. Quartz. Efficient. Soulless. I was surrounded by millions of dollars of timepieces, yet there was no time here, only commerce. Suddenly the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the podium on the stage at the far end of the room. The conversation died down. The hum of the crowd lowered to a respectful murmur. A man walked onto the stage. It was Henri Valois. If the world of high horology had a pope, it was Henri. He was the head auctioneer for Phillips in association with Bax and Rousseau. He was a man who could destroy a brand's reputation with a raised eyebrow or double the value of a vintage Rolex with a nod. He wore a tuxedo that made everyone else's look like a costume. His silver hair was swept back, his posture impeccable. Mesdames et messieurs, Henri's voice rang out, amplified by the sound system, but needing no help to command attention. Welcome to the Time for Hope Gala. Tonight we celebrate the art of time, the art of memory. Grant leaned toward me, whispering loudly, "That's the guy from before. The auctioneer. He's a showman. Watch him work the room. It's all theater, Bill. Just hype." I didn't answer. I was watching Henri. Henri scanned the room. He was looking for the whales, the billionaires in the front row. The telephone bidders in the gallery. His eyes swept past our group. Then they stopped. They snapped back. Henri Valois, the man who had hammered down the gavel on the Paul Newman Daytona for $17 million, froze mid-sentence. He squinted against the spotlight. He took the microphone off the stand. "One moment," Henri said. The room went silent. This was not part of the script. Henri walked down the steps of the stage. He didn't walk. He glided. The crowd parted instinctively like the Red Sea before Moses. He walked past the front row of Saudi princes. He walked past the tech moguls. He was walking toward us. Grant straightened up, puffing out his chest. "Here we go," he whispered to Jessica. "He knows who the big money is. He's coming to butter me up before the bidding starts. Watch this." Grant stepped forward, extending his hand. A wide, winning smile plastered on his face. "Henri, good to see you again," Grant said, his voice projecting for the audience. "I'm ready for that Patek, if the price is right." Henri Valois did not slow down. He did not look at Grant's hand. He walked through Grant's personal space as if Grant were made of mist. He stopped 2 feet in front of me. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. 500 people were holding their breath. Henri bowed. It was not a nod. It was a formal, deep bow from the waist, a gesture of deference that belonged in the 19th century. "Maestro," Henri said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion, "we did not know you were in America. I would have sent a car. I would have sent a plane." I looked at Henri. I saw the genuine awe in his eyes. "Hello, Henri," I said, my voice quiet, contrasting with the amplified silence of the room. "I took a taxi." Grant turned around, his hands still extended into empty air. He looked like a statue of confusion. "Wait, what?" Grant stammered. "Henri, you got the wrong guy. This is Bill, Jessica's dad, the tinkerer." Henri slowly straightened up. He turned to Grant. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by a look of arctic disdain. "Tinkerer?" Henri repeated the word as if it were a slur. "Sir, you are speaking of a ghost, a myth." Henri turned to the crowd, raising his voice so the entire room could hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," Henri announced, "you came here tonight to bid on masterpieces, but the master himself is standing in the back of the room." He gestured to me. "This man is William Hensley, known in Geneva simply as the watchmaker of the Grey. The Patek Philippe Grand Master chime. He designed the isolation mechanism for the sonnerie, the Marie Antoinette Breguet in the museum. He is the only man alive allowed to touch it. He is not a tinkerer. He is the architect of modern high horology." A gasp rippled through the room. I saw phones coming out. I saw the realization dawning on the faces of the collectors. The name Hensley was a rumor, a whisper in the industry. To see the face was like seeing a unicorn. Jessica was staring at me. Her mouth was open. Her face was pale. "Dad," she whispered, is that true?" I didn't look at her. I looked at Grant. Grant was sweating. The confidence was draining out of him like oil from a cracked casing. Okay, Grant laughed nervously, trying to salvage the situation. "So, he's a big deal in the watch world. That's cool. I didn't know. He's never said anything. He lives in a dump, Henri. You should see his place. It's full of junk." "Junk," I repeated softly. I reached into the pocket of my tuxedo. "Speaking of junk, Grant," I said, "I believe we have some unfinished business regarding the scrap metal you disposed of earlier." I pulled out the broken brass mechanism. I walked over to the nearest cocktail table, moving a half-empty glass of champagne aside. I placed the broken device on the white tablecloth. It looked stark against the linen. The jagged shards of the synthetic ruby caught the light of the chandeliers. The bent titanium cage looked like the skeleton of a small, precious animal. "What is this?" Henri asked, stepping closer. He put on his loupe. He leaned down. He gasped. It was a sound of physical pain. "Mon Dieu," Henri whispered. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with horror. "William, is this Is this the celestial prototype, the constant force escapement for the Sultan's commission? It was, I said, until 3 hours ago. Henri looked at the damage. He shook his head. The impulse pin is shattered. The cage is warped. The geometry, it is destroyed. He turned to Grant. Did you do this? Henri asked. His voice was quiet, dangerous. Grant shrugged, trying to maintain his bravado, but his eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit. It slipped. It was greasy. And Bill said it was a prototype. That means it's just a test piece, right? Not the real thing. Not the real thing? Henri laughed. It was a cold, barking sound. Henri stood up. He took the microphone from his pocket. He addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, for the benefit of the uneducated, Henri said, pointing a finger at Grant, let me explain what lies on this table. This is not a test piece. This is a Model 4 gravity escapement. It is a unique mechanical computer designed to negate the effects of gravity on timekeeping. It took Mr. Hensley 8 months to machine by hand. Henri paused for effect. There is no tooling for this. There are no spare parts. The ruby was grown in a laboratory in Zurich specifically for this device. To repair this, it would require rebuilding the entire assembly from raw bullion. Henri turned his gaze back to Grant. Sir, you asked about the value of things earlier. You wanted to know what real luxury costs. Henri looked at me. William, the valuation for the insurance purposes. For the Sultan? 6.2, I said. $6.2 million, Henri announced to the room. The silence shattered. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the ballroom. 6 million? Grant choked. He grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. His face had turned a sickly shade of gray. That's impossible. It's just brass. It fits in my hand. That is the price of genius, Henri spat, and you have destroyed it. Jessica made a sound, a small strangled whimper. She looked at the broken metal, then at Grant, and finally at me. Dad, she said, her voice trembling, $6 million? You had that in your apartment? In the box with the toaster parts? I told you it was a commission, Jessica, I said calmly. You told me to sell it for scrap. You told me Grant would buy me a new one at Home Depot. I didn't know, she cried, tears welling up in her eyes. Why didn't you tell me you were rich? Why do you live like that? I was ashamed of you. I brought Grant there to fix you. I am not rich, Jessica, I said. I am wealthy. There is a difference. Wealth is what you create. Riches are just what you spend. I looked at Grant. He was pulling at his collar. He looked like he was about to vomit. I can't pay that, Grant whispered. I don't have $6 million liquid. My assets are tied up in crypto, in the startup. Bill, listen, we're family, right? Practically family. It was an accident. You can fix it, right? You're the master. I can fix it, I said. It will take another 8 months, and another block of titanium, and another ruby. I stepped closer to him. I saw the fear in his eyes. The arrogance was gone, stripped away like cheap plating. But I do not work for free, Grant, and I do not work for people who do not respect the time. I'll pay you, Grant pleaded. I'll pay you whatever I can. Just don't sue me. The investors are here. If they hear I destroyed a $6 million asset, I'm ruined. I looked around the room. The investors were watching. They were whispering. I saw the man with the Nautilus shaking his head. I saw the sharks smelling blood. Grant's reputation was dead. He was revealed as a bull in a china shop, a man who destroyed value rather than created it. I don't want your money, Grant, I said. I suspect you won't have much of it left after tonight. I reached out and picked up the broken mechanism from the table. I wrapped it carefully in my handkerchief. I am taking this back, I said. I will keep it on my desk. A reminder. A reminder of what? Jessica asked, a tear rolling down her cheek. That some things cannot be fixed, I said, looking at her. Not every fracture can be polished out. I turned to Henri. Thank you, Henri. I believe I have seen enough of the high life for one evening. But William, Henri pleaded, stay. Let us honor you. Join me on stage. No, I said. My workbench is waiting. The Sultan is a patient man, but time waits for no one. I turned and walked away. I walked through the crowd. This time they didn't look past me. They looked at me. Men in $5,000 suits stepped aside to let me pass. I heard whispers of the watchmaker, 6 million, legend. I didn't stop. I reached the exit. The cool night air of New York hit my face. It smelled of exhaust and rain, but it felt clean compared to the perfume of the ballroom. I hailed a taxi, an old yellow cab with a dented fender. Where to, buddy? The driver asked. Chicago, I said. Just kidding. The Upper West Side. I leaned back in the vinyl seat. I touched the pocket where the broken heart lay. It was broken. Yes, it was a tragedy. But as the streetlights flickered past, I felt a strange sense of peace. The ticking in my head had slowed down. The rhythm had returned. I pulled out my phone. I had one notification, a text from Jessica. Dad, I'm so sorry. Can we talk? Please. I looked at the message. I looked at the timestamp. I thought about the years of shame, the junk, the apologies she made for my existence. I turned the phone off. The taxi rattled over a pothole. I closed my eyes and listened. I could hear it. The faint, phantom ticking of 1,000 clocks waiting for me in the dark. My world was small. It smelled of oil. It was cluttered. But it was mine. And it was priceless. Epilogue 3 months later. The workshop was quiet. The winter light slanted across the bench, illuminating the dust motes. I was working on the replacement. The new ruby impulse pin had arrived from Zurich that morning. It was perfect, a microscopic sliver of red light. My phone rang. It was a lawyer from a firm in Midtown. Mr. Hensley, the voice said, I represent Mr. Grant Sterling. We are finalizing his bankruptcy proceedings. He has listed a debt to you regarding a destroyed prototype. He is offering a settlement of $12,000. It's all he has left after the liquidation of his startup. I adjusted the loop on my eye. I picked up the tweezers. Tell Mr. Sterling to keep it, I said. Tell him to buy a watch, a real one, something that ticks. Sir? The lawyer asked, confused. You're forgiven the debt? I have already been paid, I said. I looked at the brass cylinder in the vise. It was spinning perfectly. The balance wheel breathed, tick, tock, tick, tock. The heartbeat was back. I got my time back, I said. I hung up the phone. I returned to the work. The world outside continued to rush, to break, to scream. But in here, in the silence of the gray, everything was right on time.